Thank you for listening to this episode, and follow the podcast on social media by finding @Prestigious_pod. And if you'd like to be coached on how to live a more prestigious life, you can reach out to me, Chris Beane, at Chris Beane Official, or by emailing the podcast directly at prestigiousinitiative@gmail.com. Lastly, sign up for our newsletter either through social media or on our website. This is the Prestigious Initiative. Welcome. I'm Chris Beane. Today we're going to be diving into a topic that I believe that every entrepreneur needs. It's the link between self-actualization and business growth. Joining me is Jesse Gilmore, a transformational coach, a father, a marathoner, and the creator of Leverage for Growth method. Jesse has helped over 100 agency owners reclaim their time, scale sustainability, and build lives that they are proud of. So if you're ready to move from burnout to freedom, this conversation is for you. Welcome, Jesse.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Chris.
So, Jesse, why would somebody like to listen to our conversation here today?
Yeah, and so if you are a founder or a business owner that may have your hands in a lot of different things, so you might be the person who's doing the work, and it kind of feels as though you've created a job in your business. Then what we're going to talk about today with Chris is a method that I had to learn over a decade of being an entrepreneur and dissolving multiple businesses because I couldn't really figure out a way out. And I finally figured out the way, and I call it leverage for growth. So if you're that operator, you're that person who's doing the work right now, and you have a vision for having a business that can sustain and grow without you, our conversation is for you.
Super. Now, Jesse, you've been able to pivot on your journey from burnout and leverage into growth. Can you bring the listeners into a little bit about that backstory for you and tell us how that worked for you?
Yeah, totally. So the Niche and Control, who is my fourth business actually. My first three businesses, if I didn't work didn't get done. And I started my first business when I was about 19 or so, for a vision to make a big impact on the world through what we had called the North Coast Collective. And that first business was kind of like I fell in love with an idea, and I had taken all the business advice of, working harder than your competitors, and that whole hustle culture that is now running rampant. And it led me towards 60 to 80-hour weeks working in the business and not really finding a way out. And I was too close to the trees to see the forest. And it actually got to a place where, especially that first business, was gaining a lot of success in the eyes of the market, but inside I was dying because I had fallen in love with the idea of entrepreneurship creating more freedom, but in actuality, I was creating more of like a jail cell. And those first three businesses, I dissolved the first one, even as it was becoming successful. Started a second one, thought it was just the business, but I realized over a period of time it was me and how I was setting up the businesses. And I went through three businesses and dissolved those and had to suck up my ego, went into corporate. When I was in corporate America, I learned the power of systems and the power of being able to duplicate yourself and giving an environment for people to thrive and actually do the work either better or at least at the same quality as you can. And it wasn't until I took that corporate knowledge and I started to apply it towards my agency clients, where we started to develop a method that got some really, really great results. So I went through burnout, dissolved businesses, learned in corporate what I was missing. And then Niche and Control really helps agency owners to get out of the same trap that I had in my first three businesses.
All right. So let's go back through that a little bit. You get 60 plus hours a week. What type of things are you thinking when you're doing 60 plus hours a week? Where is the silver lining to that? And is there a light at the end of the tunnel? And if so, what does it look like? Why put that much time, energy, and effort into something before kind of structuring and thinking about the systems? Was it a lack of knowledge? You didn't know that ahead of time, or tell me about that.
Yeah. So I had taken a lot of business advice from other business owners. So before my first business, I was going door to door selling office supplies, and I talked with each one of the business owners asking them, what's the ticket to a successful business? And then they would tell me, and I'd write it down. And I collected a lot of different journals of knowledge that those journals never said the word systems, which is super funny. Looking back on it, I'm like, obviously that's the most important thing, but maybe in the beginning of 2000s, that wasn't the term. But um, it was kind of like a missing component that I felt as though if I put in a lot of hours, I get to a certain place where either I could have somebody else do the work, but anytime I did that, I was kind of like micromanaging. I would like look over their shoulder numerous times, and then I would spend more time micromanaging than it would be if I was just doing the work. And that happened too many times. Like it was like every time I was trying to put somebody in, I couldn't really figure it out. And I think corporate really taught me how they can replace people so they can move people around and do different jobs without the customer being impacted or even knowing that a different person's doing the job. And it wasn't until I was way closer to it and seeing how a $4 billion global corporation does it that I started to realize, man, this was the thing that was missing. So, yeah.
Systems, standard operating procedures, kind of are linking together a little bit, but they also diverge a little bit in my thinking as well. So I'm going to do kind of standing operating procedures. We'll start with that. So I think this is the business informing the employee how to do that specific job in order to best help the customer, the client. And the wonderful thing about that is once those things are in place, the business can, like you said, they can shift around their employees to try to find the best person for that job. They follow the standard operating procedure that's set by the business. It's a script, more or less, or a set of check marks or whatever they have to do, and then they can just kind of be in that role. No problem. It's not a big deal. The challenge with that, from what I have found, is twofold. One is a lot of times those standard operating procedures get out of date pretty quickly because the things are moving with the business, and all of those operating procedures have to be updated at some point in time. So that's one thing, is the updating of these, and then the next thing is making sure the employee understands, one, let's say the intent of the like their purpose of that job, the intent of the mission there, but on top of that, they have significant time to go through that operating procedure so they understand what they can do and how to best service their customers. So how would you structure or to help to solve those two issues?
Yeah. So the first one, let me take one step back because SOPs are, I said in a previous podcast that when you're building SOPs or standard operating procedures, or actually a system, you want to look at it from more of a holistic lens first. SOPs are basically like the leaves on a branch. If you think about a business system, you're actually looking at like the tree trunk, the parts of the business that are not necessarily changing as often. And you start there where it looks at like kind of what's the vision, what's the mission of the company, what's kind of like the values, the principles that this business is going to operate from. And then from there, you're able to look at maybe some of the branches that are coming out, which are like policies and how does the organization work, and more of those high level kind of like how does this business operate. Then from there, we start looking at the actual like I guess brand like smaller branches, I guess, where you're starting to look at the actual processes. Now, process would be like client onboarding as a process, or the setup of a ad campaign as a process, right? And when you look at process, you're working at the flow. And one of the things that I teach in my mastermind and different trainings is this thing called a value stream. It's basically the flow of value through the system, from a lead to a prospect to a client to completing the client agreement. And on the other side of what is what's called throughput. Your job as a founder is to increase that flow and keep the flow of value going through the system. The reason why I'm telling you this is because SOPs are the subject to change kind of parts. And each one of the process flows, you're going to have different steps, and each one of those steps is broken down into an SOP. So if someone is being trained on something with an SOP without understanding the process flow, they're going to have a lot of questions. That's going to suck, right? And so a lot of the training actually comes from the process flow, where you're looking at a diagram, a visual representation of the process. And then from there, you're able to dive kind of a little bit deeper into the how-to, which is the SOP. Now, that should solve the first piece where you're looking at context and how do you train this person and so forth. There's also another part that you brought up, which is that sometimes they get outdated. The most important thing that an organization can do is have the people that are doing the work be the ones who are actually creating the SOPs, and it's their responsibility to update it when there are changes. So if you change a system, or like a project management system, and you have SOPs in a project management system, obviously all of those have to change. But if you change anything within the process flow, you have to relook at some of the SOPs to see if anything needs to be changed. There is a build process when it comes to SOPs and systems. And then there's a system improvement process that goes on afterwards. And I would say that every single one of the SOPs needs to be reviewed, signed off on, retrained, kind of tested on a quarterly to a 6-month basis. And you just kind of build it into the process. Part of the reason why I talked about that, like the values of the organization, is one of the values that is really beneficial in every organization is continuous improvement. So if you start just making it so where there's a certain percentage of time or there's a dedicated time block for those improvements or the review of SOPs, then it's actually enabled the people to improve them.
Very good. And very well broken down, easy to understand. Very good. Yes. That's SOPs. Now moving to systems. Again, in my head, they are connected, but they're two separate things because the SOP is like what the employees are doing, but the system is you touched on it a little bit. The value stream, you have the stream of clients coming in, the customers coming in, however, whatever that looks like for your business. But the systems there, at least in my head, are a little bit more automatic. They're computer AI, sometimes even now in this day and age, kind of not generated, but controlled, automated to happen based on a certain thing. So if I have somebody that signs up for a newsletter, okay, they get tagged as something, and then those tags all connect to the larger portion of getting them to move into the next area that we want them to go down, like the click funnel that everybody kind of has. That type of system, I think, it is a little bit different than what the SOP is, a little bit anyways. But with that type of system, two things again. If you could pick one of them, the SOPs or like that like business system, which is going to be the most important or to be most up to date or followed up on, which would those be? And then the second part of it is if somebody was trying to build that type of business system kind of from scratch, what would be some questions that they could ask themselves in order to help guide the building of that system?
Sure. So your first question based around the business system or SOPs and which one is more important, I would actually I'd zoom out just a little bit and focus more on the process workflows, because process workflows include both systems and people. And so when you think about the process workflows when they roll up are the actual like business system. And when we say business system, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's like a software. It's really just the operation of the business. And when you're trying to create with business systems and SOPs and all the kind of like environment for people to be empowered to run whole parts of the company, is that the business itself can be self-forming, self-improving, like it creates itself. It's like an organism rather than a hierarchy. Okay, so that starts off the first part. The second part, can you remind me of what that question was? The second one.
Yeah. If somebody doesn't have like a business flow, like a click funnel type of system to their business, and we were trying to figure out like the value stream for them, what would be some questions that they could ask in order to help to steer them in the right path?
Yeah, totally. So if you're just starting off, if you have everything in your head, the best thing you can do is do a brain dump where you write down everything that your business does. And you start with services. So services could include, for a lot of our marketing agency clients, it might be like ads campaigns, or very specifically meta ads. And it might be, setting up the ad campaign, launching the ad campaign, managing the ad campaign, and then optimizing it, right? And then from underneath those, you can kind of start breaking it into pieces. And project management is called decomposition, where you're taking kind of like a deliverable or something that you're creating and breaking it down into manageable pieces. So that way, when you focus on the execution of those pieces, it kind of rolls up to whatever that deliverable is. So brain dump is the first thing. Start with client fulfillment, especially if you're a founder where you're doing the work right now. And if you're trying to figure out, like, I have a million different services, what do I need to focus on? Focus on the ones that are in your head the most, or the ones that you are doing. Because if you relate to my 60 to 80-hour weeks and you're like, that's me right now, I can't find time to spend to actually deliver the systems, right? You want to figure out, what are you doing right now on a weekly basis that you could either eliminate, automate, delegate, or time block, which is a whole nother productivity side that we can dive into if you like. But once you understand kind of where your time goes, systems, effective systems should make it to where you can do the same amount of work in less time. And so that brain dump is just kind of like everything that's in your head. If you need to focus on freeing up your time, then the tasks and the decomposition and the systems that you build should be focused around giving you the best leverage, right? So if you only have a half an hour for you to develop systems, you better well make that the best half an hour and focus on the things that are actually going to help you have an hour when you implement those systems. That brain dump is really helpful. From that brain dump, you start to look at deliverables. I talked about that a little bit ago, where you're looking at, like, what documents are being created. Is there certain meetings that you have for, like, a client onboarding process? You have a kickoff call, right? That might be the end of a process and the beginning of whatever the next process is. And when you do the brain dump, there's not really like much of a screening to it. And it doesn't even really matter what order it is. The second step is taking that and starting to put it in the order based around what's called dependencies. So certain things have to happen before other things in order for it to flow, where you don't have what's called rework. These are all like fun operations terms that I'm using, but what you want to do is you want to create a process that is effective at getting whatever you're wanting to where you don't have what's called rework, where you have to do the same work a second time or a third time because it wasn't done right the first time. And that kind of sets up for mapping it all out. So once you have it in an organization, then you just like get into lucidchart.com, which is really cheap. It's like a Microsoft Visio, but pretty easy. And then what you can do is you can start making it visual. And the reason why the visual component is really important is because you want to be able to communicate in a super short period of time, a whole process, which is what you can't do in an SOP. And if I look at process flows, because I've been doing it for about 11 years, in a very short period of time, I can start to apply like lean principles to it and know how to streamline it where there is less time and it's more effective. But that gives it at least a starting point. There's more to it as you kind of go. But does that help, Chris?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, very good. Now, I want to talk about self-actualization here in just a second, but you touched on calendar and automating and delegating that whole kind of process.
Mm-hmm.
I think probably if somebody's in that 60 to 80 hour work week, they need to go through this kind of brain dump type of system. Perhaps something, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think perhaps something that would be helpful for them is to go through and kind of track how much time they're spending on individual things throughout the week. That way, that can help to inform this brain dump, so they get a head start. Okay, well, listen, I'm gonna do the brain dump on Friday, so this week I'm gonna track and what I'm doing each hour of the day, or every 15 minutes or half hour, however you want to do that. Have an alarm go off. Okay, this is what I did. Okay, and then you can go through and check those things at the end of the week. Okay, this is where I spent the most of my time on. None of this was meaningful. None of this moved the needle. I need to change this. And then they can kind of have some pretty informed decisions when they're going through that brain dump process. Is that probably a good start?
It's like you read the book already. Yeah, leverage for growth starts off with the time log. So logging your time for every half an hour for 7 days gives you raw, real inputs to determine how can you start freeing up that time. We walk clients through that 4-step process where, based around what happens in that time log, you can determine what can I eliminate. So if there's no reason to build systems on things that don't actually need to be done. Okay. And also, if you always feel like you're like wasting time, like scrolling social media or other things that are just distractions, and just eliminating them entirely will give you a clearer focus. Okay. So eliminate is one step. The second step is, out of all the things that you are doing right now, can you automate? Now, in a previous podcast, I talked about how data transfer should never be done by a human anymore because of the automations and capabilities of that. But if you can automate it, it's worth doing. Now, there with automation, there is big, large scope things that take a really long time, and then there's short scope. I would focus on what has the biggest impact in the shortest amount of time to actually create the automation. With if you can't eliminate it, automate it, then can you delegate it? Okay. If you can find somebody that is within your team or that you can hire that can handle some of that kind of like low level admin type of tasks, things that are low risk, but just like time consuming. That is really helpful. And then the fourth step is based around time blocking. Now, time blocking, sometimes people just think, oh, I'm just going to allot 2 hours to work on this one thing, but it has more to do with just the organization by which you're organizing different types of tasks that are using the same type of part of your brain. So if you are focused on, like, if you're a website developer person or something that's very technical and you're working on a website, then it might make sense to time block things that are similar to a website build. So anything technical, just batch together. If you're task switching or you're jumping between working on a website and then sales calls and then team leaderships or whatever, you're going to be so exhausted. Where if you just reorganize it a little bit, it'll free you up. And what's really interesting is that we've had multiple case studies where literally just the time log is one of the biggest unlocks for people. It's so simple, but it's like unbelievably effective. We had a client that was working 80-hour weeks, Mike, and I asked him, why did you start the agency? And he's like, oh, I wanted to spend more time with my kids. And I was like, oh my God. And I'm like a father of three. So I'm like, you gotta spend more time with your kids. And he's like, I'm just working too much, And what we did was we did the time log, and we did it for 6 weeks straight. And he went from 80-hour weeks to 40-hour weeks. And then he quadrupled his business 3 months later. And it's crazy what happens when you can just kind of get into the flow, and it kind of sets up for the rest of the method. But
very good.
yeah.
All right. So I that was something that I was kind of thinking through as you're telling me the brain dump, and it's wonderful that that connects so well with what you have going on. Let's move to self-actualization. I know that you talked about the connection between self-actualization and business growth. Can you bring me in, explain what that means in your experience?
Sure. So if people have never heard the word self-actualization, it actually comes from Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where you're becoming a better version of yourself. And self-actualization is really the understanding that you're going to have to morph into different versions of yourself in the process of scaling a business beyond you. And this is the reason why Niche and Control always talks about, we always talk about being a transformative type of company as opposed to a transactional company, because we're more focused around the actual experience of an agency owner going from the doer or the operator to a trainer to a manager to a leader to a visionary, right? And when you think about those 5 different stages that someone goes through on their journey to having a business that can sustain and grow without them, there is different skills, different mindsets, different versions of them that has to switch, going from the person who's doing the work all the time to a trainer. And that one switch in itself will just kind of piece apart a little bit, because it talks about it's literally the switch that we're talking about on this podcast, which is building the systems, freeing up the time, and being able to train somebody else to be able to do the work, right? And self-actualization means that if you have a strong vision for where you want to take your company, and it's a stronger vision than the resistance to letting things go, like certain things that you might have perfectionism on, then you have to become a better version of yourself in the process. So what I've found through my own experience and working with over 100 agencies is that as you embrace a self-actualization piece of the business where you're developing yourself and you're starting to put boundaries on the work and you're starting to be more prioritized in the actions that you're taking, then what naturally starts happening is that the business grows. And Warren is a good example of this from a case study. So when I started working with Warren, he was one of my first agency clients. And we took him from 15,000 per month to 100,000 per month in 9 months. And he talks about how a lot of it had to do with the way that he was looking at the business. And I told him in one of the coaching sessions, I said, Your business wants to grow as fast as you're able to allow it. And your job as the founder is literally just to keep on removing all the barriers that are making this business stay the way it is right now. And so he quickly started switching into the trainer kind of mode. And when he started bringing people in, what we realized was it took 9 months for an account manager to become independent when we first started. And I was like, that's got to be way shorter, And so we started working through it, and then we were able to carve it down in less than 90 days. And once that happened, everything changed. And it comes down to the way that you're looking at the business from a trainer lens is very different than the doer lens. And then a manager is different than a trainer, and a leader is different than a manager. Right? So and that whole thing comes down to self-actualization. If you focus on it and you actually truly understand that you're going through a journey, a transformative journey, then business just naturally grows as a byproduct.
Jesse, you said something there that I thought was really, really awesome. You said you want to be in a transformational type of business rather than a transactional based business. That I think is that is such a wonderful mindset and way to look at those, because then what that does is that puts growth as the mindset. It puts growth right front and center. But moreover than that, it also keeps the clients, your customers, also right there at the base, because we want to grow not only for us, but we also want to grow from them. If it's transactional, then we see the clients, the customers, like dollar signs and money. But that's not. I mean, on some intent purposes, that is what they are, because that's what they're doing. But if I can better serve them, if I can transform the business to best serve the clients that we're working with, then I'm going to have to be, locking my doors. Essentially, hey, look, we're full right now. We can't pay you. We can't do anymore. You got to hire more staff in order to service all these people that want to come work for you. So just that shift alone, I think is awesome. And I think that you that self-actualization, I think, touches on another big thing that people often forget or miss out on. The owners of these businesses, so there's kind of two ways to kind of think about this. The owners of the business, number one, if their life is not on solid ground, if they're outside the business, home life is kind of, not going super great, then when they come to business, they're not going to be the best version of themselves. And if they're not growing consistently, then the business is going to have a hard time to grow consistently. And the other thing I think is you touched on the vision. Oftentimes the person who started the business has a vision for what they want their business to be. However, if you think about it in terms of like a ship captain, the captain of the ship, but the owner of the business is like the captain of the ship. They can't be stuck in scrubbing the deck, because then they can't look out to see what's going on. Really, a lot of times they need to be having those people put in all these different places. In fact, even steering the boat so they can be up in the crow's nest to look and see where they want to go next with their business. Then they can communicate to the person steering the ship, hey, let's try this out. Let's go over here, because that's where the vision's leading us. But if they can't remove themselves from the business far enough to have that vision, actually actualize that vision and put it into reality, then the whole thing is going to fall apart.
I love that analogy, by the way, the ship's captain one. Yeah. And if you think about it also, if you study CEOs or people that are founders that are visionaries, they are talking in like years and decades. Okay. Their time orientation is vastly different than the people that are doing the work. Okay. And why it's really important to actually start moving towards that visionary component is because you can make decisions as a leader or as a visionary. Those micro decisions actually determine where you're taking the ship or where you're taking the I was going to say boat, the business, and when you focus on the vision and you start to understand that your greatest gift to the business is the vision, and finding and creating the right systems which enable and empower the people to work the ship so that way you can focus on where it's going, is ultimately where you want to end up. Now, there are different stages, and sometimes people just try to jump it and then they turn it off, or they turn it on and then they're like visionary and then they get pulled back into it. So there is an order by which you do it to where it's more sustainable, where you switch from what am I going to do in the next 15 minutes So what am I going to do today? What am I going to do this week? What am I going to do this month? What am I going to do this quarter? And what am I going to do this year, this decade? That time orientation comes from being able to free yourself up, which is what me and Chris are talking about with the time and then the systems are all kind of like the foundational components to being able to view your business not in days and weeks, but in like years and decades.
Now, as the CEO or the founder of the company, what do you think has to happen in order for them to start to see where their business is going to go in weeks, in years and decades, as opposed to minutes and hours? What are some shifts that
Mm-hmm.
they can make?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the majority of founders that may be listening to this working the 60, 80-hour weeks right now are just firefighting. They're jumping from one thing to another thing to another thing, and it's really exhausting. And so when we look at, and I want to keep on just bringing back up the gems of what we've talked about so far, me and you. The time log is one of the best things you can do for awareness and those little decisions to start changing, right? Change is going to be required if you're working the 68-hour weeks. You have to switch something. The systems component is another thing that's going to be needed in order for you to get out of firefighting, right? And if you start to view, this is going to go into more of a mindset, but if you view everything that's happening in the business as something that's working for you, trying to teach you something, it's trying to get you to be better, right? If you embrace the learning within this process, then you'll get to a place where the systems that are being built will start to prevent the firefighting from happening. If you are constantly firefighting, there's no way you can focus on decades, or like even years, or what am I supposed to do, even this quarter, right? And if you're firefighting, you just keep on getting pulled back in. And so when you start to carve out time to work on the business where you are focused around systems, or where is this business going, or who are we serving, right? What are we offering to the market? Am I empowering my team correctly? Are they feeling empowered, right? All these, like the questions that you start asking yourself when you take the time, they change. They're transformative, right? And the way that you look at the business is starting to change a bit as well. And so I would say some of the best things that you can do is just realize where you are. Are you right now the doer? Are you the trainer? Are you the manager? Are you the leader? Or are you actually the visionary? Okay. And the majority of people that are listening to this that have stuck with us for a half an hour are most likely the operators or maybe the trainers, right? And if you are that, just embrace where you are right now. Don't beat yourself up for not being a visionary at this period of time, and just realize, okay, if I'm a trainer, how can I be more of a manager? Right? What do you need for management? You need things like meeting structures. You need metrics to be able to manage from afar, so you're not a micromanager, right? If you are a doer right now, how can I set up the training systems? You just got to have to understand where you are right now, and just understand that the things that I'm talking about with agencies are actually just founders. Okay, we just focus on agencies, but the leverage for growth method, which we've talked about the first 2 steps of 5, is literally just a step-by-step process to start freeing up your time to focus more on where is this business going and being more of that visionary.
Now, Jesse, founders, okay, so we talked about time. Founders, I think, have a tough time setting a boundary around what their work time is going to be. And I guess, okay, so why do you think that is, number one? Because that leads to the 60, 80 hours, a week. And then what can they do to kind of have a hard boundary, like a shutdown routine at the end of the night where they shut this down. Okay, I'm done with work for today. It'll be there tomorrow. Any fires that are going to be there, they're not going to blow over. I'll be there tomorrow. It'll be fine. Shut down. I'm done. Let's move on. What are some things that they could do to help with that?
Mm-hmm. So I hate to be a broken record about the time log, but it's literally it gives you so much raw data. So if you look at the time log, you want to look at start and end times for business. Okay. And actually, even before I get into the practical, let me talk about your first question about why do you think that there's actually an issue when it comes to boundaries. So there's an identity that founders have with their business, and they have kind of like an unhealthy connection to their business to where a lot of times, if the business is doing really well, they feel like they are successful and they are worthwhile and they're deserving, right? If their business is going through a tough time, which all of them do, then all of a sudden the founder feels really bad, right? And there's not really a separation, just even from the mindset of a founder and their business, right? Now, what happens is that there are certain things that'll pull you back into the business regardless, like a largest client sending an email at 5:30 p.m. about like leaving. Okay, that's going to pull you back in, right? But when we start to look at boundaries, you want to start looking at what is my current state right now. That time log is going to give you an understanding of whether or not you have boundaries or you don't have boundaries. Are you working on the weekends or are you not working on the weekends? Are you closing down shop and then during family dinner you're starting to pull out your phone? And when you start to become aware of it, there's a change management model called OCTAR. It's awareness, knowledge, desire, action, results, right? And when you start to become aware of something, like you're pulling out your phone and you're starting to do things that you literally just could wait until the morning to do, you become aware of it, and it gives you an understanding of what could change. And I think that the most important thing is understanding that the business and you need to be separated in a place where you can look at the business, and whether it's up or down doesn't necessarily affect you, like emotionally. And when you start to understand that there's a separation, the great thing in America is that we have LLCs that are literally like separate entities. If you take that a step further and you start to understand the business in the future, sometime in the future, needs to sustain and grow without you, which means that eventually you're not the one who's doing it. I think that's like a mindset shift that needs to happen. The second piece is that if you look at your time log and you realize that you don't have any boundaries, set boundaries. So give yourself an hour and a half to 2 hours before when you wake up to the start of work. And this gives you an understanding of having morning routines, investing in yourself, your own development, being able to put daily deposits into other parts of your life, such as your body, your being, or your balance, like spirituality and your health, and then family life, right? I think that the boundary separation is actually harder for those that have families or are married, or sorry, other way around. The boundaries are actually harder for the people that don't have families or kids, because it is literally the only thing that they're focused on. For me, I kind of was forced into it by having 3 kids and being able to have those boundaries. But no matter what, you got to start setting times. When am I starting work? When am I going to end work? And by setting clear start and end times, you immediately have to be more prioritized. You have to prioritize your time more when you set boundaries. And what will happen naturally is that when you start to set boundaries and you do another time log and you realize you're out of there and then you can change it, what happens is that you start to realize that prioritization, you can't get everything that's on your task list done. So you have to focus on the most important things, which also enables you to focus on systems, team empowerment, different things that are actually needed. So the boundaries is literally the stepping point for like a whole trail of kind of ripple effects.
As a fellow father of 3, how has your how has your family influenced the way you structure your day and the way you structure your business, how you meet with clients, and the whole deal?
Mm-hmm. The loaded question. I could probably talk for a long time.
Okay, so we talked about boundaries already a little bit. Let's
Yep.
diagnose this, or not. Let's distill this down to 3 takeaways besides setting boundaries for the family. Like if you're around the family, business isn't happening because you need to be around the family. So what are
Mhm.
3 other ideas or mindsets that you can be in order to help to have that separation, and how does that family impact your work life?
Sure. So I've empowered my wife to be really pissed off at me if I don't come up by 5 p.m. and I'm usually be there around 4:30 or so. So I've taught her that it's okay to have kind of like strict boundaries as well. So we work together on that kind of piece. The other piece is that we have like family values of like having dinner together, and that I'm not working on the weekends because I'm like a recovering burnout person, so I want to make sure I never go back to it. And so with the family, it just in summary of it all, I've empowered the family to hold me accountable for what I've set up, which also means that in the business, I've had to structure it in a way that allows me to have endpoints and boundaries and start and ends and so forth, which means that time zones is a thing, right? And so I can focus mostly on the US and Canada and sometimes the UK, but might be a little bit harder in Asia when they're 13-hour difference, right? And I've had to say no to certain opportunities that are in different time zones, and where like the only way to get on a podcast is at 9 p.m. Like that doesn't make any sense, right? And so you learn to say no to certain things that allow you to really allow an organization in my own life of the priorities that are most impactful to me. I had a lot of issues with my father and burnout as well. So it's actually a generational thing where he got burnt out and it was rough. And he was not there during my childhood, which made me realize that I don't want to do that for my kids. And I want to be a better father. I want to be a better husband. I want to be a better entrepreneur. And the entrepreneur that doesn't overwork, but is more smarter about the time use. So that way I can create a legacy. And the legacy is not based around financial, even though that's one component. The legacy is more based around values and how I showed up as a father, because I never want to look back and have regret. So I know I might have gone on a tangent there about that,
No,
but
that
it
right
helps.
on. That was good. Now, Jesse, you're also a marathoner.
Mm-hmm.
Does that endurance type of mindset trickle into your mindset as an entrepreneur? And if so,
Mm-hmm.
how?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. What's interesting is I wasn't a marathoner in my previous businesses. Kind of an interesting correlation that I just realized there. But yeah, I think in my first businesses, I was more of a sprinter, both in reality and then also within the business, where I focused more on like what I could do in this very specific moment, as opposed to more of a long term vision. And with marathoning, yeah, I just realized that I've actually become a better version of myself when I do that, where I take on something that when I first did it, I was like, oh, I've only done half marathons. I've never done a full. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And then I end up doing it. There's a build of the character that comes from marathoning and being able to run really long distances, continuing beyond the struggles that happen in the midst of mile 17 seems to be always the hardest one. But and that mindset of looking at the business from a marathon perspective, where you're going the longer distance, allows me also to focus more on the vision of impacting 1 million entrepreneurs, which is ultimately how I've structured a lot of the business, to focus more on client case studies. Like that is our North Star metric. We're focused on 1,000 client case studies, in-depth interviews of people being transformed. And I think that there is a lot of correlation between looking at the long distance, going through the marathon of entrepreneurship, and looking at it from a lens of, going the length, the full marathon. So yeah.
And it's interesting because you talked about the top level CEOs. They're able to think in terms of years, decades even, as opposed to hours, minutes, and weeks and days. Do you think that kind of mindset shifts marry with running sprints versus running marathons?
I totally do. And I think it's actually based on not gratitude, gratifying, short-term gratification. The short-term gratification and long-term gratification, or delayed gratification. When we think about everything in short term, then we make decisions that might not be aligned with what we want long term. And I think that when we focus more on vision, we're thinking long term, and we can make those micro decisions right now that might be saying no to somebody trying to pay you to do the work, when in actuality that work in itself would keep you more in that operating role, right? That would be an example of a time where if you don't have a long-term vision, you might just see the work and like, hey, sweet. And then it might not be a good fit, right? And so, yeah, I would say all CEOs that are focused on like long term most likely They're probably not marathoners, but like all marathoners, but they have that same kind of like delayed gratification focus where they can make decisions that might not be popular that are going to get them to their end goal as well.
Well, I think, coupled with marathoning, you as the business owner, the visionary, the founder, there is going to be rough patches, and you have to be able to kind of grit your teeth and face those challenges head on and make it through the other side in order to continue on with the race. And the race is the business at this point. But if you have those opportunities to kind of dig in and fight back against those things, to face those challenges, then it allows you to be more committed. Like when you finish that race, it feels so good. Especially, I mean, an
Mm-hmm.
easy race is an easy race, that's fine. But a race that you actually had to like work in order to get through, that is probably maybe not the best numbers. It's not going to be the most impactful for whatever the trophies that are, but it might be the most impactful for you, because what you learned there was you learned that, hey, even though this got tough, even though this was challenging, I made it. And it feels so good to achieve something after putting in the hard work. If something's easy, that's, whatever. But if it's hard, then you can have that joy, that fulfillment when you get to the end. And running your business is no different. If the business is easy, if it's on automatic mode, super great, I guess, but maybe you should be implementing, or maybe you could be implementing some other things to make it, even better than what it actually is. But what that means is you're going to have some challenges that you're going to have to face, and you have to be willing to go through those obstacles that are going to come. Life is
Mm-hmm.
not a straight line. Like, we often think like, oh, I'm going to start this goal and it's going to be uphill and boop, I'm going to end right here. But the way that I kind of think about this is the journey from where you are now, your starting point to the goal that you want, is a uphill battle for sure. But you also have to go through blindfolded, and there's booby traps all over. You don't know which way to turn or go, and sometimes you might have to go down 5 steps in order to go back up. But we have to be willing to do those things in order to see it through, in order to accomplish that goal. And I think that
Mm-hmm.
having the type of mindset as, running the marathon, I think that couples and can inform you to help you to go through those challenges as a business owner.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, one of the things that we do as kind of like a foundational um, work for agencies is we go through a mindset training which is focused around what's called the three selves. And so we get them really understanding what is their current self, what is their current version of being right now. I ask them a series of different questions from that and get them to understand here's who I am based around the past. It's the answer of like who am I, right? And then we also focus around the future self. So at the end of your life, what do you want to be or remembered for? And what kind of values and things that do you want to instill on people when they look back on you? And then when you start to look at these two different states, if we just ended there, it would be this one big gap. But what we do is we start focusing on who are you becoming? Who do you need to become in this process where you're letting go of things that might have held you back so you can start embracing that journey that you're on. And I think this is one of the most powerful things that happens. And I actually didn't even notice the correlation between when I'm teaching clients on mindset and then marathoning. But we get people to start thinking about it, the long term of like, why did you start the agency in the first place? What's your end game? What are you trying to accomplish? And the road to accomplish the three main things that agencies are trying to do is they either want to work in the business when they want to, they either scale it to the moon as much as they possibly can, or they want to sell it. So those are the three main things. And what's really interesting is regardless of the end game, the pathway to get there is the same, which is leverage for growth. The pathway itself is not easy. And Chris, I think you touched on a really important part where the actual struggle and the obstacles are actually geared for you to become a better version of yourself. And when you go through it, it might not necessarily be picture perfect. And success is never linear. It's always exponential. And it's like based around the things that no one sees for a long period of time. And then all of a sudden it happens. And it comes down to just embracing that ruthless commitment to the vision that you have. And if you don't have that vision, please, after this podcast, take some time, block off everything, just go into what do I actually want without any limits. Just write it all down and start understanding what you want is what you want to focus on.
Jesse, I had a question for you. Do you know? Have you heard of Carl Jung?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah,
Have you
I
heard of
used to
his?
study psychology before I got into business. So,
Okay. Have you heard of his theory of synchronicity?
mhm.
Okay. So what's really interesting is yesterday I started a journaling practice where I have to answer, who am I becoming? And then I go through the way to become something better or different from myself. And you said that exact question in that explanation there, which I wrote down, which is just yeah. Anyways, it's just really interesting when synchronicities happen. Sometimes trying to pull out what they mean and how impactful they are and why it happened. All those things are very interesting. But yeah, I just yeah. Anyways, you said the exact question that I'm going through to answer. This is wild. Yeah,
Yeah, let me give you a copy of the book after we're done here,
yeah.
because there's a whole chapter on the mindset component,
Mm.
and then the three selves. There's a part of that where you can actually go through an exercise very similar to what I just described, and it might be very timely based around what you're
Ooh,
talking about.
all right. Very good. Thank you. Now,
Hmm.
Jesse, if somebody's listening and they feel stuck, they're stuck in that operator mode right now.
Hmm.
What is an action that they can take today to make a movement towards freedom?
Hmm. I would have two actions. I know you wanted to limit to one. But first one is figure out what your vision is for the future, and figure out what your why is. Like Simon Sinek, start with why, right? Figure out what your actual vision is that pulls you. So it should not feel like a push. A push is like, I have to hit 10 million in revenue and blah, blah, blah. That's like a push, right? A pull might be, I'm going to want to impact a million entrepreneurs, right? Very different kind of ways of motivation. That vision is going to be really key. And then the second thing is the time log. um, I highly recommend that time log being the number one thing that you get from this. If you didn't listen to anything that me and Chris talked about and all you do is a time log, you're going to get something very valuable from our conversation, where you just log your time every half an hour for 7 days, look at it, eliminate, automate, delegate, time block. Those are the most important things. And every single client that comes in, they do those two main things, the three cells and then the time log. And that sets up for the individual path towards whatever they're trying to accomplish.
Well, okay, Jesse. So as we're finishing up here, we're talking about vision. What is your vision for how your business is going to move forward? How are you going to continue to help business owners scale and live life intentionally?
Hmm, I love that. So it's funny because I've literally talked about my future self version this entire podcast. So yeah, at the beginning of Niche and Control, and very specifically once I sold out of one-on-one spots, before I switched into more of a group basis, I had a vision for impacting a million entrepreneurs. And what I mean by a million entrepreneurs is that there is so much kind of life lessons that I've taken in my journey that I would just love to save uh, other people that might be one or two steps before me, or not, maybe the first time founders. Just save them years of trial and error doing it themselves. So what I'm focused on is the impacting a million entrepreneurs. What does that mean for niche and control? So right now, niche and control focuses on marketing agency owners as the main target, because they get the really, really good results from what we do. Before this, there was a lot of like synchronous events that we would do, and things that were more based around time zones. In the next 3 months or so, and we're going to focus on an asynchronous version of being able to deliver the same stuff so we can impact more people. And so over the next few months from this recording, we'll have figured that out by now. And our main goal is to impact as many entrepreneurs as possible. So marketing agencies over the next 2 or 3 years will not be the only target customer that we're focused on as we start to expand out into different founders. But I think that the impact and the transformational part is going to stay the same. My 5 strengths, according to Strengths Finder, include significance and maximizer and strategic thinker. So if anybody is like geeking out with like Strengths Finder, they're like, oh, I get it. But that significance piece is going to be the driver of this business. And Niche and Control is going to serve over a million entrepreneurs as long as I'm there.
Very good. Jesse, thank you. Thank you for today, the valuable insights. You reminded us, not just me, but the listeners as well, that business growth isn't about just revenue. We want to become that transformational type of business. And Jesse, if you had any key thoughts or final takeaways, I know we kind of already did that a little bit, but if you have any key thoughts or final takeaways to leave the listeners with, what would that be? And then if they wanted to learn more about you, to get in contact with you, to buy your book, how could they best do that?
Yeah, so we've talked a little bit about the key insights already, but I want to speak to the founder that's at the 60 to 80-hour weeks and just tell you that it's okay. You're in a certain stage. Don't beat yourself up for where you are right now. Just understand where you are and whatever the next step is for you to go from the doer to the trainer to manager to leader to visionary. Don't skip steps. Just understand where you are. Okay. That's the first thing. Give yourself grace. You've taken on a lot of risk and you're in a certain spot. You're going to be able to get out of it. Second piece is if what me and Chris have been talking about resonates with you, I highly recommend just getting a free copy of my book. It's called The Agency Owner's Guide to Freedom. And if you are not an agency owner and you're listening to our podcast, I highly recommend you'll still get a lot of value. Just a lot of the case studies are based around agency owners. But you can get a free copy of the book at nicheincontrol.com/free-guide. And I'll give Chris the link to it. If you want to follow us, you can go to nicheincontrol.com. By the time that this gets released, we may have figured out that asynchronous part that I was alluding to. And if you just go to our website, nicheincontrol.com, you'll be able to find it. So
Super. Listeners, reflect on how you can set a boundary today to reclaim your week, your time, your energy. Because when you become better, everything around you becomes better as well. Until next time, this is Chris Beane and the Proceedus Initiative signing off.